President Trump landed in Paris. He is there this morning where he is meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron ahead of Bastille Day celebrations. That is tomorrow. President Trump expected to attend a luncheon with U.S. military leaders before holding meetings with the French leader later in the day. The two are expected to talk about terrorism as well as the war in Syria. Joining us right now, House Financial Services Committee member, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney of New York, a former small business owner as well. Congresswoman, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be on this morning.
What do you hope to come out of this visit with the president and President Macron?
I think it's really interesting this president is engaging in so much symbolism. This trip is symbolic of reigniting Western civilization, freedom, and all those things that America was strong on. And I think it's interesting that he keeps going back to our historic roots. I think if you remember in the recent G20 summit, newly elected President Macron was somewhat of a populist, created his own party, and then, you know, sort of pushed his way to be next to the president. I thought was really interesting considering, you know, maybe they're not exactly the same on their policy, but I think he recognizes that this president is trying to restart our relationships with our oldest ally, actually, in celebrating Bastille Day. I think they're going to be doing a celebration of remembering World War I. These are long-standing remembrances, and I think it's symbolic. Again, the president is really trying to bring us to a new place, I think, as Americans.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see these two together. They actually do look like they have a rapport. Let me turn to the Federal Reserve Chairman Janet Yellen. Congresswoman, of course, she's going to be facing her second day of testimony this morning in front of the Senate Financial Services Committee. She delivered an upbeat assessment to your committee yesterday, which lifted markets to new highs. Yellen said that the economy is healthy enough for the Fed to gradually raise rates and begin winding down the massive bond portfolio. Let's listen to what she had to say yesterday when she spoke to you and your colleagues, and specifically after comments from J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, who warned about the potential disruption that could cause and come to the markets as a result of that wind down. Here she is.
We've not heard significant concerns or seen a significant market reaction. So we've indicated we expect to begin this if the economy stays on track this year. I expect and certainly hope that this will go smoothly.
Congresswoman, were you satisfied with Yellen's answers yesterday? Your big takeaway from the testimony?
Yeah, yesterday, I mean, she was talking about a number of things, and I think one of the most interesting things, if you look at my questioning of her before the House Financial Services Committee, is I actually got her to admit that we have too many regulations, particularly on community banks, that the low interest rates, the high regulatory burden that community banks face, and the fact that we have had, at one time, very recently had over 8,000 community banks, and we're down to about 5,000, and the need to actually recognize that some of these regulations that are imposed on community banks need to be reduced. In fact, I got her to admit that we could somehow phase out or even eliminate the so-called Volcker rule, which prevents banks from being able to invest their own secured assets. And she actually admitted that to me after a little bit of grueling testimony, but she finally did say, yes, I think the Volcker rule wouldn't apply. That's a huge start in getting us, giving banks the opportunity, especially the smaller banks who are burdened with compliance costs, the low interest rates. They have no way to try to, make any money on their, to make themselves profitable because they don't have the economies of scale. So I thought that was an interesting, at least admission on her part, although she wouldn't tell me where the cutoff was, the size of a bank that would be able to eliminate a Volcker rule application. But it was a good start, and I think it was interesting that she was asked a number of times, if you were asked or reappointed by President Trump, would you stay on? And I'm not sure that's going to happen, but I thought it was interesting that she was very cagey on that issue.
Congresswoman, it's David McDowell. Much hand-wringing over the Federal Reserve, even beginning to remove some of this crisis-era, crisis-level stimulus with this giant $4.5 trillion balance sheet. But that really falls on you, lawmakers in Washington, to pick up the slack in terms of fiscal policy. And I'm not just talking about health care reform, I'm talking about tax reform. Are you guys frustrated that the Senate isn't moving fast enough on health care that you can get down to brass tacks and pass some tax relief?
Yeah, I would love to. There's a big question. Should we have done tax relief first or Obamacare? But the problem is they're kind of hand in hand. Obviously, as a small business owner and from a district where we have some of the highest taxes in the nation, highest combined property and sales tax in my county alone, with an enormous Medicaid burden. So really, when you talk about health care in my area, it's talking about fixing Medicaid and fixing the private market. And then tax relief is going to be a huge kickstart to our economy, where we have such high taxes in New York State. So on the federal level, it would really make an impact, since we don't seem to be able to get anywhere with Albany. Albany just continues to tax and spend, and those policies, you can see, are just not helping our economy with how weak we are in upstate New York. But again, tax policy would be great. I do hope they get through the difficulty of dealing with this Obamacare issue. Obviously, we came up with a bill on the House. It's not perfect, but we came up with an amendment that would relieve our local counties of the Medicaid burden, one of the few states that still impose this enormous burden. And just how big it is, 80% of the local county budget that I have in Oneida County, New York, is consumed by Medicaid. So we need to deal with that, the Medicaid so-called, creating a private market issue on Obamacare, and then the tax reform. These are the two most important issues that we need to deal with to get our economy upstarted. I'm concerned about the Senate. I think that they had indicated they're not going to be doing their recess. They're going to drive through this. I think they have a lot of work to do. I'm not sure why our bill, you know, as imperfect as it may be, could be a starting point for them. Right. Because remember,
they could have just voted on your bill, right? I mean,
absolutely.
And that's not what they did. They decided to just rip it up and start again, which has a lot of people scratching their heads. I mean, you delivered a bill, and they wanted to start anew.
Yeah, and actually, it's going to go through reconciliation anyway, and that's why they want to create their own version. When we finally get their bill, we'll have to go through the whole reconciliation process, which could be very lengthy. I mean, this is going to be a long, hard process on a very important issue. I think people need to be patient. I think we have to fix this now. Obamacare is hurting people throughout this nation.
So
they're not able to get...
You think you'll get it done this year? I mean, do you think we will see health care and tax reform happen in 2017?
I'm not a prognosticator, but I know that we're going to get to tax reform. It is so important to our communities, so we're going to get there.
Let me squeeze in Peter Kiernan here. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. A lot of the conversation and the market reaction had to do with wage growth or the lack thereof, and I think all of us were expecting a little more hawkish tone from her before she came before your committee.
Right.
What was your reaction?
I thought it was interesting when you talk about wage. She was very cagey on a lot of issues. She really didn't get. We really pressed her. I do think when you talk about wage growth, a little bit off the topic on a different area. It was interesting. Congressman MacArthur took her down a road where she just kept blaming, well, we have aging communities. And it turns out that the aging communities, the people in the older sectors, are actually working out now more than ever. And it was actually the 25 to 50 category that are working less. So when she described aging, you know, her facts really didn't meet up to what she was claiming. And she really didn't have much of an answer, but it really tells you what's going on in this economy. The newer, if this is true and these facts can be relied on, we need to figure out a way to get the younger people back to work. And I think a lot of them are not really finding jobs that they want to have, and the wages are stagnant. We also have this imposed minimum wage that's traveling around the nation. New York State recently passed a 3-tier minimum wage, absurd as it may be. Yeah. That's actually going to hurt us in the long run. You know, it makes us uncompetitive with our neighbors in neighboring states that have a lower minimum wage. So it's really interesting how she was really dodging that question as well.
Last week we reported, I think it was teenagers are facing an unemployment rate of 13%, which is incredible, I thought. Congresswoman, it's good to see you.
Thanks so much.